Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Biollywood podcast, where we explore biological threats in pop culture and what they teach us about real-world biodefense. I'm JT O'Brien, research principal at the Bipartisan Commission on Biodefense, and I'm joined by our executive director, Dr. Asha and George.
Hello.
And our policy principal, Rob Bradley.
Hey.
Today, we're unpacking 28 Years Later, the long-awaited sequel to 28 Days Later and 28 Weeks Later. The film is directed by Danny Boyle and written by Alex Garland. The film reopens the world of the rage virus nearly 3 decades after the original outbreak and examines how society, pathogens, and survival strategies have evolved. So this film is set nearly 30 years after the original rage virus outbreak, and 28 years later returns us to a fragmented and feral United Kingdom. The story centers on Spike, a teenager raised in a remote island community on Lindisfarne, who breaks quarantine to find medicine for his mother. What he discovers is a mainland shaped by viral mutation, ideological fracture, and the slow erosion of human civilization. The film focuses not just on survival, but on how culture and biology mutate together. This is your spoiler alert. This episode will contain full spoilers for 28 Years Later, and spoilers for 28 Days Later, and 28 Weeks Later. If you haven't seen these films, we highly recommend that you watch them before you continue with this podcast. Okay, so let's jump in. I want to get your first reactions to this film. For me, it was, I think 28 Days Later is a seminal, film in biodefense.
Mm-hmm.
Because it doesn't call zombies, it calls them the infected, which is what they are.
Yeah.
So I'm curious for what you guys think, it's been over 20 years since the original films came out.
It's what struck me. There are two things that struck me the most about this movie when I went in to see it versus kind of expectation versus reality. I was expecting a movie that would be at the very least a spiritual successor to the original film, perhaps not so much 28 Weeks Later because of the creative team behind it, but one that would reflect the fact that it was officially a franchise and would seem mature both in production and in terms of storytelling. It certainly was mature in terms of storytelling. I think the story at the heart of this was very interesting and captivating. What struck me though was that they decided to have a very similar cinematography and look to this film as they did with the original, almost guerrilla filmmaking, which I was not expecting in the slightest based on the.
Apparently it was all filmed on iPhones.
Yeah, exactly, which is the modern day equivalent of what they were filming back, almost 26 years ago. And so that really surprised me. What also surprised me was this is not, in the strictest sense of the word, a zombie movie or a biological infection movie, right?
Right. No.
This is a post-apocalyptic movie, but I was actually floored by the fact that you don't see a single infection take place outside of someone who has already been infected and hung upside down prior to the events of the film. So an implied infection, but not a single of the main characters is infected at any point in the film. It was almost like it was a statement that Danny Boyle and co wanted to make of, this is not the same movie we made before. This is a different film told in the same universe. And this is about how you manage post-biological apocalypse, not focusing on transmission, infection, and whatnot, except to allude to the fact that apparently these, mutated or otherwise infected humans can in fact give birth to a non-infected children. But that's really the only thing that, and
but that might be a statement to what you're saying.
Exactly. So it's a different kind of movie almost. And then I'm sure part of that was intentional because of how much time has elapsed, but it was clearly a conscious decision. At every turn, every time I assumed someone was about to become infected or bitten or otherwise taken off the board, they were not. And the one main character who does die, dies on her own terms with dignity,
right,
in a way that I was not expecting whatsoever. So that was a complete shock to me.
Asha?
Well, I thought it was very entertaining. I thought it was a perfectly entertaining movie. I guess I'm in the same boat with you, Rob. in terms of wondering why there was no transmission illustrated. But it did seem to me that they were illustrating the worst aspects of an endemic disease. That it's just there, and whatever is in people is mutating, but it's there. That they were just focused more on its presence versus its transmission. That's how I took it.
Yeah, I think that's correct. And you know, and that obviously you could talk about the mutation itself, but I think it is interesting that it you know, clearly I always wonder if the lack of infection is demonstrative of the people understand how to avoid an infection better now than they did back then, or perhaps that you know, they find themselves in fewer circumstances or situations in less populous areas where they could accidentally become infected. But it was still surprising that not a single person ended up getting infected.
Well, I think it's a question of, on the mainland, or what they're referring to as the mainland. I think it's just a question of how many normal, uninfected people are there. Like, so if everybody's got the disease on the mainland, what transmission would we see? Yeah. I mean, even if they are transmitting it, maybe it doesn't make any difference because you have the virus anyway. So you're, you know, that's
when it would go zoonotic, maybe.
Well, yeah, that's the other thing I noticed there was no implication of animal transmission.
But we saw a lot of shots. We saw a lot of shots of animals, but you're right. I don't think any of them were shown to be infected, which I thought was surprising because with less hosts, you'd expect it
to try to find some other way to thrive. And even in 28 days later, when the crow is involved in bringing Lisa and Scarecrow getting infected, it's not that the crow's infected; it's that it was picking at a being a head or a human body part that had been infected. Right. So again, 20 years later, there's an implication, and somehow it hasn't spilled over into the animal population because none of these folks on this island are checking the animals to make sure they're healthy before they're eating them.
Right.
They're hunting and they're bringing food back, but there's no protocol to double check that. And presumably it's the same thing with Ray Fiennes' character. It's not. I mean, he'd probably be better suited to do that if he wanted to, but there's no indication that that's what's happening.
Right. I also think it's with Ralph Fiennes' character, the iodine.
Yeah.
So I did look that up. And we probably all experienced this at some point where they rub that yellowish stuff on you before they cut into you or before they do any kind of a procedure. And it is a supposed antibacterial, antimicrobial. It's unclear how effective it is. But we've all experienced probably getting that on us at some point.
Yeah. Well, and in that environment, if you're
more down dish try.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Something's better than nothing.
Where do you get it though?
Well, it's a massive stockpile. They were found the stockpiles during abandoned cities over the years and kept them for himself. One thing I do want to make to my earlier piece about infection, as I'm recalling, there was in fact one or two infections, but it was entirely the EU team that got stranded on the island,
right,
and therefore were less accustomed to dealing with that sort of scenario or situation.
Well, so I think maybe we have two things, and you have increased resistance, perhaps, for the Brits that are there, even though they're on like their little separate island with the causeway or whatever in between. Maybe they have not developed some resistance. They just don't realize it because they're so freaked out about everything. But with the EU people or the Swedes coming in, those are naive hosts, right? Just complaining. Everybody's been
they got lucky that it was on an island where they could quarantine it. Had that happened in mainland Europe, it would have been they're catastrophic.
The infection.
Yeah.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, I did think it was interesting hand waving at the beginning of the movie to say that they contain the infection everywhere else, but just kind of gave up on.
Yeah, that didn't make sense. Like, let's harp on that a little bit, because that was something that bothered me. Because they said it right at the beginning, and some of the extra material that the movie studios have put out from like their websites, NATO and the EU completely pulled out, so they're not even sending airdrops of supplies anymore.
Why is that surprising to you?
Why not?
Well, because I would think, look,
And airdrop has no risk. You have no risk of just flying a plane over.
yeah,
And
but
dropping
this
it.
is an extreme situation, and somebody probably decided that if we don't drop food, then maybe we can just.
Well, you're not dropping food, then why not drop nukes?
Well, yeah,
Those are the two extremes.
but nuclear would spread and affect the entire
Yeah.
ecosystem of the Earth, whereas if I'm not saying this is good thinking, I'm just
Yeah.
saying that somebody might have said, "Hey, we just kill all the hosts." So we're not going to help them with
Yeah.
additional foodstuffs and medicine
Yeah.
and whatever else. We're just, that's one possibility. Another possibility may be, countries just said every country for itself. They mentioned NATO and they mentioned EU, but it could be that the member countries were like, look, we have to deal with ourselves.
Yeah.
And they're on their own.
I did take note of the fact that they chosen to quarantine this entire island, and they somehow were able to burn out or get rid of the infection elsewhere. I guess for political purposes, I could see why the rest of the world might feel a little twingy about a determinative solution for a island,
Yeah.
in one way or the other. And perhaps it was most politically expedient at the time that they decided to enforce this this policy to take this action versus the other two, the extremes that or not extremes, but the other two courses that you mentioned. By the way, nukes don't make sense in this scenario. I think firebombing would be much more efficient or effective.
And anything that would just kill them.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, I think without the
radiation.
and uninhabitable. But I think it's entirely possible that the world's governments thought that might be a little bit too squeamish for their populations to swallow.
Yeah.
But setting that aside, it is not, in my mind, a good idea to just let this virus continue to mutate for years and years and just hope that it never crosses the channel again.
Or hope that it doesn't spill over into a bird that then flies over.
That migrates and infects something else, or just leaving this reservoir
Yeah.
actively circulating.
You can blow up the channel. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I know we all they think that that's a bottleneck, but it spills over into the birds, then it's game over.
It's a great point. If
But
for the
we see that all the time.
They managed to evade catastrophe because this thing hasn't spilled over into animal populations in 28 years, which just seems highly unlikely based on the interaction between humans.
What we've seen with COVID?
Why? Don't you think there are plenty of diseases that just affect us and don't affect
Does affect them?
And it was
So
the Ebola platform.
Ebola has never spilled over into.
I don't know that. So, I mean, it came from monkeys, so maybe it's more accustomed to primates. But I think I'm reaching with that.
I mean, there's another piece there. I don't want to necessarily get off this policy question too soon, but there's another question of how does a Ebola-like virus somehow persist in population for this long without burning through the infection?
Yes.
Well,
Some
especially
mutations
considering
are odd.
Ebola itself is we don't consider it to be a successful virus.
Yeah.
Right.
In the way that it kills in that it kills the host. But I guess technically it's been modified enough to overcome that particular problem.
Yeah. But the mutations, I think some of them are odd because you have the new alpha, who's like faster, stronger, smarter, has some level of intelligence. But then you have these other ones, the ones that look like they have like fat stores, and they're kind of moving very slowly on the ground.
Yeah.
And then you have the normal infected, the routers.
And then you have the normal infected. Yeah. So you have these different mutations, and some of the theories.
How do we know that they are mutations? How do we know that if you get infected with something and have a pre-existing condition like obesity or something, that this isn't how the disease winds up presenting itself, as opposed to, a mutation caused this? Because if we look back at the previous movies, not enough time had really gone by.
Well, it was very fast acting.
Well,
in the previous movies.
To begin with, right?
Right.
But fast acting, and we just happened to see group number 3, right? The runner people in those movies. But that doesn't mean that the others weren't out there. We just didn't see them in
Right.
those movies.
Well, they might not have had enough time to fully develop biologically, right? Like, because the amount of mutation involved with the slower kind of pig-like versions, I'm sure that would have taken a while for the body to have changed that way. And you only see about 6 months worth of infection or of the virus spreading in the first two movies. So maybe to your point, it took longer for that sort of mutation to take effect even back then. Maybe
Or for the host, either their host mutation or a
Yeah.
viral mutation. But I mean, if you think about it, like if the resources start running out for the virus,
Mhm.
it's going to want to keep its host alive longer.
Yeah, but you still have to. My problem with the fat people, the fat zombies,
Yeah.
was that you still have to eat something to get the fat. Your body
Yeah,
doesn't
that
just
can-
generate fat by itself.
that was a
snuffling around in the dirt.
But weren't they eating worms?
Yeah, they're trying to eat worms.
But
But you
again,
can't get fat.
not fat filled,
Yeah,
right?
no, completely,
Oh.
yeah, I completely agree.
I don't know what now it could be a metabolic thing, right?
It could be
I
metabolic.
suppose there's a way to metabolize stuff. But even then, if
Even
you
then,
eat
you would want to be
mushrooms
small.
all the time, I don't know that you could ever metabolize enough mushrooms to create fat.
Right. You'd want to be smaller. And
Unless
Yeah.
it's not fat.
it could not. Yeah, it could be
You know,
something
we don't
else.
know what that is. Is it some kind of edema that looks like fat but isn't fat?
Just water.
Eat something. We don't know. Water retention kind of makes sense with when you're ill. People do retain. So that's them. And then I will say with the alpha, we're assuming that a mutation results in numerous alphas.
Right.
Because somebody says, "Oh, that's an alpha, so there must be multiple alphas." But how do you know it's it's the virus that mutated, as opposed to a person who is like that, and they themselves just happen to get ill, and this is how the
Right.
disease. Maybe it
It affects their brain differently. They have a little.
yeah, it's like you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily maybe
Yeah.
the virus is just the virus, but it's again I'm back to is it
Is it the host?
is it interacting with pre-existing conditions in this case being actually something psychological that allows for that kind of expression.
I think they imply in describing the alphas a little bit that it is perhaps the latter piece, the idea of the virus, not necessarily a mutated virus making someone into an alpha, but a virus interacting with unique biochemistry within certain individuals. I think they describe it as essentially instead of a bad thing to the human body, it ends up being almost like steroids.
Right. Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
just specific to select few humans. I think you're right. It's not really a type. It's just this is how the virus impacts the
Right.
people, not a type of the virus.
Right. That's how I felt like
Yeah.
that. I felt that could be a possibility. It's a
Yeah.
question of the virus interacting with something that's already within various people, and sometimes it presents this way, and sometimes it presents this other way. But JT, you mentioned earlier that there is a possibility that if there were mutations, or if these presentations were due to mutations, you could make the argument that for the alphas, this is another way to survive and
Right.
protect, right? So it's driving the organism or the in this case, the human, to behave in a certain way such that it won't get killed, as
Right.
opposed to the other thing.
Right. Yeah. It's basically the other slow moving.
Yeah, or the regular,
But
even the runners.
that's also an evolutionary strategy.
Yeah.
To stay low to the ground and not move a lot and not take much energy.
That would be for the slower ones.
Yes. I mean, like they're both evolutionary strategies.
Yeah.
It's just one is.
One is definitively better off than the other. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
One appears to be in a healthier body and mind.
Yeah.
Well,
And it's going to be able to exert control to a certain extent over other infected.
Yeah.
So not only the survival strategy, it almost establishes dominance over the area.
But we could say that about regular humanity too.
True, but clearly this is a form of these humans evolving or engaging in some sort of evolution to survive and thrive and dominate their environment like humans truly have done in eras past.
And I think the biggest indication for me that these alphas were conscious was the ritualistic killing.
Mm-hmm.
The pulling of the
The
head and the spine from the body,
using it for
predator style,
and then mounting it for display.
and then mounting it for display.
Yeah, that's. I mean, that can be that last piece can be a little animalistic, right? You're establishing your territory. That
Yeah,
other animals have left things.
but the trophy,
Sure.
the predator style trophy. Like the second I saw that in the theater, I immediately thought of the Predator films, and it's like that's when you know the Predator is. Oh, this thing is smart. It's not.
Well, what I think is interesting is that all these things are expressions of what we see in humanity anyway.
Right.
Virus aside, people do all this stuff.
Yeah, and it kind of
Not every good person, obviously, listeners, but many people. We have many examples of people doing stuff like this, killing ritualistically and taking trophies, putting trophies around, getting really, really morbidly obese and moving slower, and
Right.
etc. We do have people who get ill or get high, and they do run like maniacs.
They do.
We know this. So I think if you go back to like the the poem that they read at the beginning and all that, I think I thought there were a lot of implications for, never mind this virus. This is just a societal issue. And this is what happens when a virus hits that society, and just sort of allows for greater, not even expression necessarily. Maybe it's the opposite. Maybe it's that it makes it easier for us to observe it and see what's going on. Unless you decide that you're going to withdraw into your little village somewhere, and now you're just hearing stories about what's going on.
But even then, like retreating into your own village, I think this movie does a great job of showing what culture might evolve to look like in this kind of environment. So there's definitely culture and community were very important in Lindisfarne. You saw that when Jamie took Spike out for his first hunt. He comes back. There's a whole party for the kit after having killed his first infected. So there is a lot of that culture that just surrounds that idea, even though it is super traumatic, almost kind of like the Vikings used to do.
Almost.
Like how they would indoctrinate.
Well, I do have a question about this, about the Vikings, because we do have our Swedish Navy personnel show up, and the Navy guy talks about the berserkers, right?
Yeah.
What made I really don't think that this was meant to be the implication. But what I wondered was, is it possible that this virus, or an evolutionary cousin of this virus, appeared way back in the day when the Vikings were running around doing their thing and dealing with the berserkers? And when you think about what we hear about some of the Vikings and the way they behaved, it is kind of similar to this.
It is.
Is it possible that we had that virus appear however many centuries ago, and then they killed it, and
they brought
killed the hosts.
Yeah.
But they also spread it around because the Vikings were going everywhere. And then maybe it sort of died out like many viruses appear to, and it became, maybe it's not a new thing. Maybe it was a re-emerging virus of antiquity.
Right. Like something that was buried beneath the soil.
Yeah, maybe it's a permafrost issue.
It could be. I think that's really interesting because there's a reason Lindisfarne was chosen. And like the only two things I can think of are the religious aspects of that location, because it was kind of one of the starting points for Irish Christianity. But then also it was the main stage for the first Viking attack that is recorded on the United Kingdom in that area. So Lindisfarne was the very first place that the Vikings attacked.
That can't be. I'm sure that's not a coincidence that they should.
They can't be a coincidence. Yeah.
I don't know.
And then for the guy to be Swedish.
And to talk about right kings, clearly there's something that's being implied here, and I think you're right, Asha. I think a lot of this movie is about the impact of the virus on community and on family. I mean, that's clearly
And family.
the focus of this. I think it's telling that when they do bring in the Swedish, soldier, for those brief minutes that he's on the screen, he's talking about all of this culture that they still have on the mainland that has been lost, to bring to the point that these children don't even know what a phone is.
Yeah.
They
Yeah, but
care
is
about
that
things
culture?
well, it is
think so.
culture. It is, phone.
This kid
having
was stuck in the
phones,
year 2002.
a gig economy. Some of the things, it's the ideas, stories, movies, all those things were frozen and locked in time. And I think it's interesting that the producers wanted to focus the storytelling as much on that as on the actual visceral threat of the zombies or being infected. It does it because it does kind of point to, we talk a lot about biological events. We talk a lot about how it can devastate society. Well, what nobody really talks about too often, although we see the extreme versions of it in movies and sometimes, but the subtle or not so subtle impacts it can have on culture, even if you do survive.
Right.
The impacts, the fork in the road that your civilization goes down, even if it comes out on the other side of this in some way, shape, or form. And this movie kind of gets at that a little bit, and I thought that was interesting.
And I think the very final scenes of the movie speak to that, because it almost seems childish, the ending of the film, with the way that Jimmy and his buddies come in almost looking like Power Rangers.
Yeah.
The reason for that is because that kid in the beginning of the movie he's stuck as a child. His entire family died in that opening scene when they were watching the Teletubbies and stuff.
Yeah.
So he's a grown child.
It's
So
known to happen that way, right? When people go through, they often say that when people go through an extremely traumatic experience, some part of them gets stuck at that age.
Right.
They talk that way. They behave that way. I wanted to ask about this causeway thing.
Yeah, the causeway.
I did not really think that was. It seemed a little unrealistic to me that their protection would have anything to do with where the water level was. And why would this be the first time that an alpha, or one of the few times that an alpha would try and run? I mean, they're smart.
They're smart enough to figure out.
So they're going to at least be watching for some time and go, oh, well, between this time and this time, I can run over there. Why? I didn't understand that. I didn't think it was a good thing to include.
I did wonder, because it does feel like they kind of stretch themselves in a pretzel. So this is how this community is protected. I think for them, the why isn't as important as the fact that it is protected, because because I was fully expecting when I walked into this movie that the movie was going to end with a horde of infected attacking this village. And I think what they were trying to do early on was kind of be like, no, this is unlikely to happen that way, because they have this causeway, because they have a fortified gate at the front. And I almost feel like the scene in which the alpha chases them down the partially submerged causeway is intended to send a message to the viewer of this movie is not going the way that you think it was going to go. Because I was fully expecting one of those two, either Spike or his father, to get infected before they got back in, and they didn't. They were both totally fine.
He did get the alpha did get pretty far though.
But then you got a flaming crossbow or a bolt
at the last second.
But the point is that I think for me that was the line of demarcation where I realized that it was not going to be that kind of movie, and I think that's why they designed it that way, so that it was believable that this village would not be subject to frequent attacks or assault, because that wasn't the point of the movie.
Yeah, which is to bring it back to the Vikings thing, an interesting contrast, because Lindisfarne was specifically a target because it had no defenses, because the English thought no one's going to attack a church.
That was obviously faulty logic. Now, he said everything that I've said before. We already know there's a sequel coming out next year.
Right, yeah.
And so maybe everything that I just said ends up being, completely false, and they end up being attacked by a massive horde of zombies in the sequel. And this is not a spoiler, because it's the scene.
See, that's the goal. Yeah.
But maybe this is to lull us into a false sense of security before bringing the hammer down in the next film.
Yeah.
But at least for this movie, that was not the intent or the aim.
And I also think like the weaponry used by the village showed like the only explanation I can add is for the reason they were using what they were using was to show that we're trying to keep a distance from these threats.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There was no use of swords, knives, anything like that, which is extremely surprising because, or a spear or anything like it in that situation, yeah, I would want the bow or the crossbow, but I would also want something if I get overwhelmed.
But doesn't that speak to the fact that these folks are smarter and understanding about infection halfways?
Yeah.
Because, yeah.
To me, that's a social distancing thing.
Yeah.
Right.
They understand. Like I feel you're slitting on these things' throats at
Right.
a foot away. There's every possibility that splatter gets into your face.
Exactly. Right.
So I think that's
Sadly, he's why the doctor wears the iodine to protect himself. There's probably I think that's a great answer. I need to think about
Well,
that.
speaking of the doctor, why is there only one? That did not strike
One
me as
doctor?
being realistic.
Or one person.
well. I think perhaps one doctor are aware of. I think it's indicative of the fact. Again, point is a culture piece and how things can splinter because of a traumatic event. There is no longer a medical profession. There is no longer as many medical supplies. There is no electricity, so you cannot operate any medical machinery. So, there probably are still doctors elsewhere in Great Britain, but this was the only one that they were aware of because he was somebody's GP 30 years ago, and he happened to be in close proximity to where they were. For all they know, all sorts of other there might be other doctors out there, but a lot of them might be dead, and they don't know where to find others. So I think this, again, points to the impacts that these sorts of events can have on society because it impacts basic medical care beyond just dealing with the infection. I mean, half this movie is about essentially getting a cancer diagnosis.
Yeah.
Think about that. And,
Right.
So I think that's...
But it's not about the virus. It's about...
Exactly.
And we saw this during COVID. Sometimes it's not always the virus, but it's people that aren't going to seek medical care
Because of the virus.
because of the virus.
Exactly.
So I think that's a
And,
scene that they really harped on.
but I agree with you. There had been other doctors out there, but I think the point was that when you don't have cell phones, when you don't have internet access, and you don't have the current address of the makeshift address, the fifth forest on the right as you're walking down the path after head out, without any directions, you have to go by word of mouth and personal observation. And this was the one doctor that they knew was around. He ended up being a weirdo, but a helpful weirdo.
Yeah, he wasn't as bad as they thought.
Yeah.
They thought he was a crazy guy he actually turned out to be very helpful. He just had some weird things about it, for sure.
A little kooky.
But
again, another inflection point of this film where it could have gotten really dark really quick.
that's where I thought it was going.
Exactly. He could have ended up being a cannibal for owning it. And instead, it ends up, for the most part, this movie is seeking to portray a lot of these people as flawed humans who are trying the best they can with what they got. I think we're going to see something different in the sequel with Jimmy and his Teletubby Jimmy Seville friend to show up at the end. But I think at least this film was mostly about portraying, people who are in a tough circumstance, just getting through the day as best they can. And it includes the father, who, played by Aaron Taylor Johnson, who clearly is not a perfect man, but was also dealing with a lot of difficulty and strife.
Right.
And trying to manage as best he could.
One thing I was wondering was, the kind of like based on like everything you just said, do you think that society, so say instead of being frozen in time in 2002, say it was in 2025 today, that was frozen in time, and now we're looking 30 years in the future, who fares better, the people from 2002 or the people from now?
I think 2002.
I would, yeah.
Because they were less reliant on technology as we are now. Our ability to retain basic facts has decreased, I believe. I've seen some studies indicate.
Yeah.
We are just so reliant on it. We're becoming increasingly more reliant on it with humanity. Yeah.
I mean, look, we've had the benefit of 23 years of zombie apocalypse movies. Perhaps that might be more helpful to us.
Yeah, well, but were any of those zombie apocalypse movies the exact type of virus that we actually end up getting hit with in real life? You know what I'm saying? Maybe the actual virus is carried on bees. We don't know.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
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 Speaking of the virus, I just wanted to quickly ask. We were talking earlier about the impacts, the mutations of virus. It, what is the realistic chances of a virus a virus like Ebola persisting in the human body for years? I've never, this is a legitimate question. I feel like for the most part, the human body is conditioned to either expire or eventually clear the virus. In many cases, HIV obviously is
Yeah.
not the exception to that. But something
Gonna kill the host.
we're killed up. Well, that's not what I meant by expire and kill those. But obviously, Ebola usually clears the body at some point.
At some point.
So then, it'd be one thing if 20 years later didn't have any infections whatsoever, and the implication is that there were biological changes wrought on the body as a result of the virus before it burned out. But you do see a couple of infections. The person is hanging upside down. One or two of the EU people, as soon as they get bit, they turn. So it does persist. Is there any historical comparison to make with regard to Ebola virus?
So there is some data that could back this up, assuming that it was genetically modified. I think we have to take that assumption as baseline. But Ebola has been found to survive in semen for for up to over a year, I think. And then it can also just persist in a dead body. One of the big problems with the 2014 Ebola outbreak was improper burial practices. So I don't know the exact time frame for how long it can persist, but with genetic modification, it already has exhibited those properties of being able to persist beyond host death, even. So I wouldn't be surprised if what you would want to do for genetic modification, if this was something that you wanted to persist in the human population to get rid of rage, that you would kind of try and find those genetic markers and enhance them, or something like that.
But it would be pretty unlikely for it to happen on its own, right? Naturally.
I think it would be pretty unlikely to happen on its own. I think we have to couch that in the genetic modification.
Tampering.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't think an Ebola virus, there's no way it'll happen naturally. I don't think, unless nature does something crazy, which it does.
It never does anything out.
Yeah.
So.
I want to go back to the poem quickly,
Okay.
because I think you had some thoughts on it, but I wanted to get more of your opinion, because it seems, I thought that had a great audio effect throughout the movie. I was glad it wasn't just in the trailer and that it was actually in the film. That coupled with the frequent pans to World War I or other military conflicts. It was never like violence that was being depicted, but the marching, I think, was the main thing. So particularly curious for your opinion on why you think that was included.
I mean, what I thought when I heard it was, I thought it set a very interesting tone.
Yeah.
I thought that, I thought that they were making a point about how things have not changed as much as we think they have. We're kind of in another same or similar situation, but for a different reason.
Did you have thoughts?
No, you don't remember at the very beginning? 5, 6, 7.
That was being announced over a loudspeaker.
Yeah.
That was a poem.
Yeah, by Rudyard
Kipling, and it was read by some actor in 1915 is when it was reported.
Rudyard Kipling. Was a Jungle Book.
He wrote that.
Wasn't that? Well, how many of the writer of the Jungle Book?
That'd be
It's an allusion to that. Allusion to a child being, immersing themselves in the world of animals to learn how to.
Wow, Rob, gosh. Maybe. I don't
I
know.
wouldn't put it past any boils.
But I don't think it's part of
He
Jungle.
did write the Jungle Book.
He did, but I don't think that poem is part of it.
Yeah, that Spike is kind of like Mowgli a little bit.
Yeah. I don't know if I would call Ray Fiennes' character Baloo, but there's a comparison that can be made there. You're talking about someone who is still young in the ways of man, choosing to immerse himself in a non-human environment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's right. I didn't.
I mean, I've done no research. I'm just going based off of my understanding of that story, obviously, and his authorship. And there are comparisons that could be made here that, when the world almost resets for you and you have children who are coming up in this environment and don't necessarily have the best role models at home, they choose to educate themselves and they choose to, go walk a different path. Yeah, that's what he tells us Jimmy at the end. Whether or not it's a smart idea is an entirely different question. We'll find out in the sequel.
Yeah.
But
He seemed to be pretty well off.
well,
Well,
he would have been. He would.
he
have been
seemed
a little
very squared away.
Well, in terms of skills, absolutely.
Yeah.
In terms of his situation at the very end of this movie, he would have been in trouble had it not been for
Virginia and the
Virginia and his boys.
Yeah.
And he might still be in trouble for all they know.
Okay. One other thing I wanted to talk about just before we close up here with ratings. I think we need to focus a little bit on the baby
Okay.
being born.
Okay.
And the mother was infected.
Yeah.
The baby
The baby
was not.
We'll see.
And we also had that moment with Isla
Yeah.
showing humanity almost to the
I love showing humanity to the infected woman, and the infected woman in turn was reaching out, seeking comfort
right.
in her vulnerable moment.
Showing that they're not just zombie, like they are humans still at the end of the day.
They have that human instinct for comfort, to seek out comfort and to seek out like those that are like
Well,
us.
it could also, I took it as that there's a possibility that the emotion associated with childbirth may have been able to overcome the impact of the virus on other emotional centers in the brain.
I agree.
Yeah.
Especially in that
There-
moment as she's pushing, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
Thereby returning said zombie to a pre-viral state.
If you can for just a moment.
Just,
Yeah.
just for that time.
Yeah. If it had not been for the depiction of a couple of infections in the film, that would have been a potential evidence to me that, the baby being born healthy and uninfected, that might have suggested to me that the virus is no longer actually running through the population. And in fact, what we were seeing was just the permanent biological changes in these, individuals. But since the virus is present, there is that question on how, how did this baby get protected? And right in that moment, and I know, we've talked before about both internally and elsewhere about, just the protection of, that babies have from what their mother might have or lack thereof.
But I don't know how is this possible though? It's a virus. Is it possible that a virus does not get into blood because of the mother's blood? I know the placenta has some protective properties, but it's still, got blood in it,
Yeah.
right?
So some of the research that I did, I was listening to a video about it, and they said that it is like there are other non-congenital diseases that are not passed from mother to fetus.
Okay.
And they also had said that apparently the placenta has a different circulatory system that's almost separate from the mother's.
Okay.
And that differentiating factor might have been the reason. So it depends on the virus. There are viruses that definitely do spread through the placenta into the baby, but that there are examples of ones that don't.
Interesting.
Now I don't know if that's because it's the circulatory system thing or just because there are other things like with our brain crossing the blood-brain barrier, where some viruses can get through there just by virtue of how small they are.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a possibility here that in 28 years, we have human beings that have developed, well, it's not a whole lot of time though, but you could develop not immunity, but change in such a way as deals with the disease.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking about sickle cell, right? That sickle
Right.
cell in and of itself is a disease, but it protects from a different disease.
Yeah.
So is it possible that women in this situation. It's 28 years. It's just not enough time. I would think it would be generational. But is it possible that, the body knows that this is happening and we can't let it, continue to propagate this virus? I mean, so let's do this. Let's strengthen the placenta. Let's strengthen that barrier so that at least,
The
it's
next
not going to keep
generation.
going to babies.
I think that's
Or, I mean, we're assuming this has something to do with the placenta. The other possibility
right.
is that now we have the birth of a child that is just resistant. Period.
Which we saw in the indications of 28 weeks later.
Right, right.
There was an implication that some individuals are immune to the truly transformative effects of the virus, impact their eye a little bit.
Yeah.
You don't, nothing is outright said during this film, but you could potentially take that away from the birth of this child. Perhaps this child was also born with a genetic.
And we don't know because there's so little science in this movie.
Right.
We don't know that baby, we know that the baby isn't expressing the disease, but we don't know that it isn't a carrier.
Right. Exactly.
Because that was the other thing from 28 weeks later, right?
Well, that's what we were talking about. I guess not you, but you could be a carrier.
You could be a carrier.
Right.
You know,
And that's what I was talking 28 weeks later. Yeah.
Yeah.
So not immunity, but immune to the effects of the virus, even if you are
Right. And to be honest, like I think since we are on an island, which gives additional evolutionary pressure just by virtue of its isolation,
Mm-hmm.
who is left out of all the people who have been infected or died?
Mm-hmm.
Who are not infected or not suffering symptoms? There probably was an evolutionary pressure.
Mm-hmm. You think?
For the people who
Within 28 years.
I think that's on an island because I think it's accelerated almost. Yeah. And with how quickly this virus acted in the first film, I think it's possible, yeah, that there were evolutionary. I mean, yeah, humans are humans. We can save whoever we want, but there might have been some evolutionary pressure that selected for people who happen to be more resistant or happen to be asymptomatic, or because that's a win-win for the virus, right?
Okay, but then what about DNA and how certain, without going through an evolutionary change, how certain factors turn things on and off in our DNA? Is it possible that you have so much of this stuff going on with this virus that at least eventually the DNA in this case, in maybe just women, turns on to protect somehow, change how child's bearing goes, to protect. Is that possible? And and we say that that's possible right now with environmental pressures, right?
Right.
Yeah. So this is certainly in the environment.
I think it's definitely possible, and we do have historical examples. A lot of autoimmune disorders that occur in people of European descent, especially English, Irish, just around the Black Plague when it was in its apex. A lot of those autoimmune disorders stem from that because the immune system was overacting to prevent plague. So plague survivors now have autoimmune disorders. So it is possible,
Okay. Well, I think it's interesting. I certainly think that this movie did a good job of bringing up a whole bunch of interesting questions and issues.
Yeah.
Just by showing something on the screen, and it was thought provoking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was interesting to see, all too often if you're still talking, if you're seeing a movie that's talking about the virus, with a living human population and the virus is still circulating, there's a lot of talk about, trying to find a cure, trying to find a medical countermeasure. I think just the acknowledgement that infrastructure doesn't exist in this scenario, very interesting food for thought. That's not part of the equation whatsoever. It's about survival. It's about staying away. It's about bringing yourself in, and it's not about trying to cure and save the world or anything like that. even in movies like I Am Legend that are kind of almost post-apocalyptic, there's still that hope for a cure. And there was kind of like that, something like that in 28 Days Later. It ends up being a red herring, but here there's just not even any discussion of it. They
This
just
doctor
exist.
and that doctor, he's not looking for a cure. He's
No, he's just trying to.
he's trying to eliminate the virus by eliminating everybody who's a carrier
Yeah.
or infected.
Yeah, purify,
brute force.
burning the bodies, burning the
Yeah.
the heads. What I do think is interesting, and I obviously the soldier who was stranded on the island is not in a position to talk about it at all. But you would think that over in mainland Europe or elsewhere in the world, there would still be efforts to try to develop some sort of countermeasure.
Well, maybe
this.
they are, and they've
Yeah.
just been wholly unsuccessful thus far.
Very possibly, but just I think it's interesting that there wasn't even for that brief moment of insight you get into what's going on over there.
Right.
There's no discussion of it whatsoever.
Mhm.
Yeah. Like I would have to assume that they're hopefully like the reason he was there was to do recon. But it seems like he doesn't even know why he was there.
No, it wasn't a recon. It was they got stranded. Their boat went down. They hit a reef.
yeah.
So they were just patrolling the water, make sure no one tried to escape.
Oh, and then he got stuck.
And they ended up having to go to a lifeboat, and they got stuck on the island.
Yeah. So then, yeah, there's the fact that we heard nothing about that. Like you would hope that they would want to do recon and get samples, bring.
Was he supposed to get samples?
No.
I was stranded.
That
Oh.
so,
I mean, I understand to a certain extent why they wouldn't necessarily want to go to the island now to get samples,
by a drone.
but they have samples from whatever was happening
Right.
on the mainland.
Right.
They could have been experimenting on that all this time. And yet clearly nothing got to a point that they felt okay deploying it into England in any way, shape, or form.
Do you think it's surprising at all that in 28 years they had not developed a vaccine or an antiviral?
Well, I mean, they might have developed a vaccine or antiviral for all we know. This day, they have developed when they feel it's safe deploying, which is basically us with the Ebola vaccine, right? It exists.
Yeah,
We've been working on it for 20 years, but we still don't. We're not at a point where we're vaccinating everyone against Ebola. Maybe that's what happens here. Maybe they have an experimental countermeasure somewhere, and maybe we'll hear about it more in a future movie. But I thought it was interesting they just didn't even mention it, which implies that whatever, obviously it wasn't the focus of this film intentionally, I think, but also it hasn't reached a stage where it's, everyone on the mainland is getting inoculated against this just in case it comes over.
Yeah.
Right. But I do really appreciate that take because a vaccine isn't always going to solve the problem. We saw this with COVID. It's not okay. So best case scenario have to be a year. A million people die a year.
People continue to die
every day.
Yeah.
You can't force people to take a vaccine. That's not right. If only 60 to 70% are going to take it, the vaccine is not your final solution. So I think like what this film did really well was exploring that human element and that community element. And I think that's something that we kind of forgot about when COVID happened. We forgot about the social and mental aspects of how it was going to affect the population and communities and culture. And what this movie does really well, I think, is highlight those difficulties and those challenges that public health thing needs to resonate with.
Yeah.
Before the next thing happens.
We can only hope.
Yeah, keep going. All right, you guys want to get to the ratings?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So the first category is relevance to commission recommendations.
I mean, I think there's a lot of elements of this that touch on categories that we talk about,
Yeah.
but I don't know if there's any particular recommendation that I can think of necessarily because there's no government to implement recommendations.
Right. It's
And even if we talk about contingency planning, which we do talk about here, or environmental remediation, we are well beyond the window in which any of that's relevant.
right.
So
What amount just for that one community on Lindisfarne? Is there anything that they're implementing?
they need to work on their stockpile. I can say that much. Especially now that it's been burned to the ground.
Stockpile of what?
Well, it just they had that one shed. It had all sorts of different stockpile of different supplies, including, I believe, what limited medical supplies they actually had.
Yeah.
And then Spike burns it as a distraction so he can get his mother out through the.
Oh yeah.
So first of all, they already were having stockpiling issues to begin with. There was signage in that shed saying, we're running low. Think carefully before you take. And then on top of that, you also have internal sabotage. So there's a control issue, you know, it's an access control issue.
Well,
And now you are lacking a stockpile.
I will say that this movie, all these movies, clearly demonstrate the value of forward deploying some
Some
stuff
yeah.
from the stockpiles, so it's not all just sitting in some federal facility somewhere, and having to be airdropped.
Right.
As you said, JT. Um, I I think that there are interesting implications for our recommendations. You know, what is the role of defense? You know, that comes up more in the second movie, but even so, they, you know, the military plays in each one of these movies.
Right. They have a role.
We have a recommendation about reviewing policy um, or at least more frequently than it has been done in the past.
Yeah.
But DoD is doing that, so I don't know that I guess it's an ongoing recommendation that we do that.
Yeah.
Um, there's still a need for a strategic plan. I think
They had to have a strategy, right?
Sorry?
They had to have a like a not
What's
five
the strategy? Well, what I would want to know is like as we were talking about it earlier with all the other countries, how does this situation get taken up? You know, how does it? Because you should have like, okay, which we did not see necessarily with COVID, but if you have a pandemic, no matter what the reason is, or some outbreak that's really significant, should it not then be something that in our country, the White House says, "Hey, this thing just happened. Let's take a look at our national strategy for pandemic influenza or our national biodefense strategy and see what needs to be changed."
Right.
I will say on that point that we've talked a lot about the need for a more comprehensive implementation plan,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that this movie underscores the need for that.
Yeah.
What else? I mean, we're so far beyond, like, we're kind of beyond the pandemic.
Yeah. Beyond it, what
Yeah.
response we're and
Beyond
We're
that.
not prevention, obviously, except for prevention at the community level at this stage.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're not.
We're really on recovery and mitigation, and those are kind of almost given up on.
Well, I mean, what are we mitigating? And you know, there is no
mitigation. Yeah. There's no recovery.
Yeah, well, or at least they've decided there's no recovery for this area, so they're just stuck perpetually.
And the
response
decided that quarantine is the only option here.
Yeah,
For this entire country.
and there's no mitigation. Not that we have a whole lot of mitigation recommendations.
No.
So I don't know. I feel like there are implications, but not
Non-direct.
direct.
Yeah.
Directly addressing our recommendations. So
I mean, I think
three maybe.
This movie is full as emblematic of what happens when our recommendations aren't adhered to.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Basically, like this is as far right a boom.
Yeah, but even so, like there's so many things that just don't matter anymore at this point, right?
Yeah,
So
all the tech recommendations
or the
matter.
clinical control
Right.
guidelines. What is it? There's no clinic, first of all, and there's no control.
Right.
You know, the most you can do is quarantine,
Yeah.
and they're doing that.
That's what they're doing.
Yeah. So I don't even see like a 3, maybe 2. Not to, and it's not a knock on the film.
No.
It's more so just this film is so far right of boom that our
Yeah.
recommendations aren't really.
Mm-hmm.
This is where we don't want to be.
Yeah. This
Yeah.
is what happens when we don't.
Yeah.
When we don't adhere to the national biodefense. I would say 2.
Okay, let's say 2.
2. Okay. Next category is scientific accuracy. I think for what was there, it was pretty.
I thought it was good.
It was pretty good. Yeah.
I didn't notice anything that just made me sort of roll my eyes and say, "No, come on."
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know if there's historical evidence of virus as steroid in human beings.
No. Yeah. That
There's
line was a little.
I feel like I was being asked to suspend my disbelief about what is currently known about viruses and germs. So I don't know how accurate I would call that piece. A lot of the other pieces of it, I think, were,
I think they made it on. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I would either say a 3.5 or a 4. But I agree. Yeah, I have to knock out points for the steroid comment.
I would give it a 4.
A 4.
Okay.
Okay. Scenario development.
5.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a 5.
I think it's important to have these sorts of films to remind us of what we stand to lose.
Yeah, I completely agree. Entertainment value, 5.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very good film.
Success of the imagination or creativity, I would probably say 4 or 5 as well, just because
I think they did a good job.
that last point I made about
Each one of these movies, I have to say, is different.
Yeah,
You know,
and they touch on different
aspects
that I think a lot of people don't think
perspectives. Yeah.
about. Yeah. What do you guys think? 4 or 5?
I'd say 4.
Okay.
4. All right, 4 it is. Shock or surprise value?
The only thing that was really shocking to me was how few people died in this film.
Yeah.
That's what shocked.
It was surprising.
And how there are few, only 1 or 2 visible infections throughout.
There was a lot of subverting expectations. With what you said about the amount of people. The baby, I thought for sure that thing was going to come out like a monster.
But it was clear, because that would have been a perfect opportunity in a horror film, right? For
Exactly,
right?
Yeah.
Why? You killed the mother because she had lunged at you. Now it's a bad moment, and the baby goes, and then you have to kill the baby. So it's like an extra level jump scare plus horror, or kill a child. But this is not that kind of movie. This is not a horror film, which is something that I think is important to stay, and probably should have stated at the beginning. This is not a horror film.
Right. That's not the main
That's not the intent of
goal or intent of this film. It's more of an exploration of.
Yeah, I think there were surprising things that happened. We were expecting something else, and the movie went in various directions. The obese zombies, they're a surprise. The alpha to me was a surprise. I think that there was a doctor that was doing whatever the doctor was doing and surviving all by himself, doing all that stuff. I thought that was surprising. I think there was
And imaginative, it's,
I wouldn't say that there was the kind of shock we've seen in some other movies, but it was
it's a different kind of surprise, though.
Yeah.
So what do you guys think? 3, 4?
I could go out for me.
4. Let's say 4. Yeah.
I think 4. Okay. Now the next one is government policy. This one has to be low.
I mean, I think it has to be 0 by default, just because there is no government policy, other than they have a rule on the island that you cannot go searching for folks who have left the island, which is probably the smartest thing I've seen in any zombie movie in a long time.
Yeah.
And there's an allusion to, we tried that before and we lost a lot of people, so we're not doing it anymore. So learning from your mistakes, having the opportunity to learn from your mistakes,
right,
and then having those graves right next to the gate to kind of implying that they lost a lot of people. So there is a community government, and they have a rule that was a good rule. But as far as government policy at a high level, the only policy we see is an enforcement of a quarantine by the rest of the world.
Yeah, and I think if you're looking at the rest of the world, they messed up. They let the UK down there.
Well, even setting that aside, let's set aside the whether or not they let down the people and the government of the UK, just from a biological perspective. You should not let this virus just run rampant
on this island
for 3 decades.
Right.
So for all the reasons that we talked about earlier, I think that's poor government policy. I
agree.
It's 0. Personally.
Well, I was going to give him a 1 just because the community was trying to do some things at the community level. I don't think it's necessarily a bad policy if you're sure you can't control the spread of a disease, to cut off an entire island. If you know you can't control it, you kind of have to do stuff like that. So I would give it a 1, because I think there were some policies that were not necessarily good, but at least necessary and
understandable.
Yeah.
I could go with 1. It was fine. Yeah. Okay. Next category is portrayal by the actors.
Fantastic.
I think they did well.
Yeah. All of them.
Talking about the doctor.
That is
amazing.
It's great. Yeah.
Exactly how I'd expect a clinical, family medicine doctor to be kind of in that situation.
Yeah, and to see him acting like that, simultaneously covered in iodine, and just being so nutty as he did, but to be just so very, very clinical and asking all
Yeah.
these questions and everything.
Being real professional.
Even the diagnosis
Yeah.
to Isla was like, so I have survival equipment.
Yeah.
But it was very clinical, but it's like based on these factors and this and that. Like it's exactly what you would ask.
Casts I found here and here.
Yeah.
I would give it a 5. I
Yeah.
didn't feel like anybody was off or unbelievable or
Yeah. I agree.
Yeah.
Direction.
5.
Yeah. Production. I would maybe say, I don't know. It's either. This is like me just nitpicking. I'm gonna go to a 4 on this. I didn't like sometimes the shots that they did when an infected was hit by an arrow.
Okay.
Did you guys notice that?
No.
They would kind of shift the frame and pause for a little bit on the impact.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm
That's
nitpicking
a
though.
choice.
I'm
It
nitpicking.
was a choice. But is that a production choice or a direction choice?
That's a good question.
It's a good question.
I would put that in direction,
Yeah.
not production.
I think how the infected looked,
I think they all looked amazing.
the yard, the bone yard, as it were.
Yeah.
The skulls up and down the nose and everything.
Almost not homemade aesthetic, but using current technology, like 28 days later, that was, very clearly handheld cameras from 2002. 28 weeks later was such a high production value that it didn't look
Seemed like
grounded.
Yeah.
Yeah. But this one kind of merged those two together, I think, in a really good way. So
4?
yeah, I would say 4 or 5.
Yeah.
Yep. 4?
4.
Okay. And then the last one is writing,
Oh, that was very well written.
which I would probably give it a 5.
I can't. I don't think I could give it
Okay.
a 5.
Fair enough.
I would give it a 4, I guess.
Yeah.
4.
I'm fine with that.
Okay. That gives us a final rating of 3.9.
We have to. Something's not right with our rating situation.
We haven't gotten to 3.9 yet.
Yeah, it's usually 3.7.
3.7 is usually.
3.7 is usually.
Yeah, 3.7 is usually our.
That's how good of a film this is.
Yeah.
3.9.
Yeah,
No, we have to modify our rating structure. We have to do
we
something.
do. Okay. Thank you all so much for joining us on this episode of the Biollywood podcast, and thank you to Rob and Asha for joining us here.
Thank you.
And we hope to see you guys next time. And memento mori.
Memento Amoris.
Okay.
All right.